Have you ever looked at someone standing at the absolute pinnacle of success, a billionaire, a superstar athlete, an industry titan, and wondered, do they really deserve it, or did they just get incredibly lucky? We're all told a very specific story from day one, right? If you grind, if you hustle, if you sacrifice sleep, and basically bleed for your goals, you will inevitably conquer the world. But what if that story is actually missing a massive piece? What if the real architecture of achievement is built on something way less fair and honestly, way more random? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving deep into the true anatomy of success. We are going to challenge everything society has drilled into us about the grind, look at some massive hidden data sets, and finally figure out what truly separates the absolute winners from the rest of us. Seriously. Think about it for a second. Why is it that some of the hardest working, most intensely disciplined people on Earth still end up failing, while seemingly mediocre talents just skyrocket to unimaginable heights? I mean, we all love those epic stories of self-made billionaires beating impossible odds, but here's the catch. We're suffering from a massive case of survivorship bias. We only ever see the one person who made it. What we don't see are the thousands of people with the exact same ridiculous work ethic who got crushed by a single bad break, a poorly timed market crash, or literally just being born in the wrong zip code. So is absolute success just absolute luck? Well, to figure that out, we first need to tear down this fairy tale we've all been sold. Which brings us to part one, the meritocracy myth. Society loves to sell us this idea that we are the sole absolute architects of our own destiny. It's called the meritocracy myth, and honestly, it's a really comforting thought. It totally validates our belief in the power of our own blood, sweat, and tears. But there is a surprisingly dark side to this belief. In his book, The Tyranny of Merit, philosopher Sandel explains how this exact idea of meritocracy actually stratifies our society into winners and losers. Because when success is framed entirely as a result of personal effort, the winners inevitably start believing their wealth and status are just proof of their superior virtue. Sandel calls this meritocratic hubris. They literally look down from the top of the mountain and think, I'm rich because I'm better. But what's the downside? Well, the people left behind, often those without fancy degrees or economic advantages, are looked at as having no one to blame but themselves. It breeds this toxic, totally demoralizing environment where failure is internalized as a deep personal flaw. Moving right along to part two, the limits of practice. So, if grinding 24/7 isn't an absolute guarantee of success, what does the actual hard science say? Look, we've all heard the golden rule, right? Deliberate practice makes perfect, the 10,000-hour rule, all that good stuff. But the actual data tells a much more nuanced story. A massive meta-analysis by researcher Brooke McNamara and her team looked at over 11,000 individuals across a bunch of different fields. They wanted to figure out exactly how much of a person's performance variance could be explained purely by deliberate practice alone. And the results are pretty wild. In the realm of games, like chess for example, deliberate practice only explained about 26% of the difference in performance. Think about that for a second. That means 74% of what makes someone a grandmaster comes down to something else entirely. Let's expand this and see how it holds up in other highly competitive arenas. In music, deliberate practice accounts for just 21% of performance variance. And in sports, it's even lower, sitting at a mere 18%. Now, don't get me wrong, discipline and consistency are absolutely required to even step onto the playing field. You have to put in the work. But the science shows they're literally just one piece of the puzzle. They absolutely do not guarantee you the gold medal. But hold on, because here is the truly shocking statistical twist. When the researchers shifted their focus to professional careers, the daily grind of the corporate world, medicine, law, business, they found that deliberate practice explained less than a single percent of performance variance. Less than 1%. That is just mind-blowing. So, the crucial takeaway here is that these psychological traits we praise the absolute most might actually be a bit overhyped. When we consolidate the science of success, we see that traits like grit and growth mindset yield surprisingly small effect sizes when you isolate them. For instance, a major meta-analysis on grit by Crede and colleagues found that it's mostly just a repackaging of basic conscientiousness, and its link to actual academic performance is relatively weak. And it's a similar story with the famous growth mindset. Major studies show that interventions meant to boost it have an overall effect size of just 0.05 on academic achievement. And in the absolute highest quality, most rigorous studies, the effect is statistically non-significant. Look, hard work and resilience definitely matter, but they are clearly not the magical cheat codes we so desperately want them to be. So what is the cheat code? Let's dive into part three, the hidden architecture of luck. If our own internal drive and relentless practice only explain a tiny fraction of our success, what exactly is driving the rest of it? To understand this, we have to zoom out. We need to transition from individual traits to the massive, invisible forces that secretly dictate our life trajectories. Basically, we can break this hidden architecture down into two massive, uncontrollable lotteries. First up is genetic luck, but it's actually not just about what's hardwired into your DNA. A major German study called Twin Life tracked the self-rated health of over 1,500 twin pairs, and they found something genuinely fascinating. As these kids grow up, the role of pure genetic factors actually shrinks. Meanwhile, environmental factors, specifically things like parental resources, household income, and the father's level of education, gain massive, massive importance. Basically, your environment acts as a giant amplifier. It either nurtures your genetic potential or it starves it. And that environmental luck? It is incredibly, almost terrifyingly precise. Harvard economist Raj Chetty developed something called the Opportunity Atlas. It's this massive data project tracking 20 million children across America. And the data proved undeniably that your exact childhood neighborhood has a powerful, direct, causal effect on your upward economic mobility. We are talking about microscopic geography here. Conditional on your own family's poverty rate, the characteristics of a neighborhood just a single mile away have almost zero predictive power for your life. Think about how crazy that is. Where you start out, the specific kids you grow up with, the local institutions immediately around your house, these things shape your life outcomes before you ever even make your first conscious choice. Which brings us to the math behind all this. Part 4, the math of randomness. Okay, let's say you miraculously survive the geographic and genetic lotteries. You make it through. Once you're out there in the real workforce, is it purely a meritocracy then? Well, a team of physicists, Pluchino, Rapisarda, and Biondo, actually built an agent-based computational model to answer this exact question. They mathematically simulated the 40-year career trajectories of individuals, and they injected random lucky and unlucky events into the simulation to see what would happen. And the results are wildly counterintuitive. See, human talent and intelligence are distributed on a normal bell curve, meaning most of us are average, a few are terrible, and a tiny few are absolute geniuses. But wealth and success in society, they follow a massive power law, a Pareto distribution, where a microscopic fraction of people holds almost everything. So the big question is, how does a bell curve of talent magically produce a power law of wealth? The simulation proved that while a basic baseline of talent is definitely necessary just to play the game, the absolute highest peaks of success are almost never reached by the most talented people. Instead, the absolute apex is almost always conquered by totally mediocre individuals who just so happen to encounter an exceptional streak of perfectly timed, extremely lucky events. Now, hearing all that, you might be thinking, well, what's the point? Should I just give up? Absolutely not. No way. Here is exactly how we reconcile this crazy data with the human spirit. As the brilliant author Nassim Taleb observed, wild, extreme, absolute success is pretty much attributable to variance in luck. That's true. But mild, relative success? That can still be deeply, significantly explained by your skill and your labor. Look, whether you become a multi-billionaire tech mogul on the cover of Forbes is mostly down to luck. But whether you become a highly respected, financially stable professional in your own town, that is still largely dictated by your personal choices, your daily habits, and yes, your hard work. Let's pull this all together in part 5. Preparation meets opportunity. So how exactly do we navigate a world that is so heavily influenced by blind chance? We have to take all this data and synthesize it into a deeply human, usable philosophy. Look, we can't control the dice, but we absolutely can control how many times we roll them and what we do when they finally land in our favor. This perfectly echoes a piece of ancient Stoic wisdom often attributed to Seneca. You see, we spend so much of our lives meticulously preparing for misfortune, don't we? We keep a spare tire in the trunk, we save money for a rainy day. But what if we applied that exact same constant background effort to unexpected good fortune? Honing your skills, building a killer portfolio even when you aren't actively looking for a job, learning how to clearly articulate your passions. These aren't just empty acts of hard work. They are active ways of training your brain to recognize and immediately seize an opportunity the precise millisecond a lucky break crosses your path. You stay in absolute peak condition so that when the door of chance finally cracks open, you are ready to kick it entirely off the hinges. But as we optimize our own individual lives,
we really must also change how we view society as a whole. Returning back to Michael Sandel's core message for a moment, we desperately need a societal shift away from this toxic meritocratic sorting. If we are brave enough to acknowledge that success is incredibly heavily weighted by the total accident of birth and the cold math of randomness, then we have to abandon our meritocratic hubris. We just have to. We need to move toward a politics of the common good, a society that genuinely values the shared dignity of all work and deeply respects all citizens, completely regardless of the fancy credentials hanging on their wall or the number of zeros in their bank account.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought. If you are highly successful right now, yes, you worked hard. Nobody is taking that away from you. But you are also the profound beneficiary of a cosmic lottery. You got the right genes, the right zip code, the right timing, the right random encounters. So if our success is so undeniably shaped by luck, what exactly do we owe to the people who worked just as hard as us, but simply ran out of luck? It is a heavy question that demands real humility, and frankly, it's one that should completely change the way we look at every single person we pass on the street. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the narrative, stay relentlessly prepared for your lucky break, and I'll see you next time.